Welcome back, guys, to another K-Swap 308 episode. Today we are going to change our format up just a little bit because we are going to be diving into not only my choice of engine, but the engine specs. We're going to be talking about what transmission I'm going to be using, Sequential. We're going to be talking about suspension and suspension uprights, steering racks, roll cages, all sorts of technical details because you guys have been awesome about asking all sorts of questions. You've become invested in this build, you've been leaving feedback, participating, and I think that's awesome. And I wanted to take an opportunity to put together an episode and answer some of those questions that you guys have been asking. Otherwise, I just don't know when we'll get to it. And also, I have been trying to keep a constant supply of parts coming through the shop door. I slipped up a little bit today. I'm sitting on my hands. So instead, we are talking shop. We're going to do a walk around the car and answer all of those questions you guys have put together. So let's dive in. As always, I will selfishly and shamelessly say, if you guys like the content and want to support the channel, leave a like or subscribe if you want to see more of the build. But with that out of the way, we can call this an intro and get to the good stuff. We're going to start things off here at the back of the car, and I'll also start by saying I promise you won't have to spend this whole episode looking at this beautiful face. But while we get going, there's a few things to talk about. The first question on the list, I wanted to start with one that a lot of people were asking, one that tons of you guys have been kind of chipping away at or asking in various ways for weeks and weeks and months. And that's from Zach Dunn. And it's, sorry, wrong question. This one's from Nathan Taylor and a ton of other people. It says, why did you choose the K24? And I like this question because I can ask a question in return. You guys tell me if you think there's an engine that is more logical for what we're trying to do to put in this car. I don't think that there is. I think based on logic alone, it is the best engine that could possibly go in this car. The K24 is incredibly lightweight. It has a huge power ceiling. It is affordable. It is reliable, and it has a ton of R&D behind it, and that's just scratching the surface. When you want to talk about the number of engines out there that have all of those things going for them, it's pretty few and far between, and it leaves us with a few other really well-established engines like an LS. And some of you guys would say, why wouldn't you put a V8 in this car, or any longitudinal V8? The main answer there is you have to cut the car in half to do it, and that's exactly what Ferrari did when they built the 288 GTO. It's almost the same car with a longitudinally mounted V8 that is the predecessor to the F40, and they added 4 inches to the chassis in order to do it. Guys that turn these cars into 288 clones cut their cars in half to pull it off. Now, I don't know about you guys, but I don't want to cut my car in half for an engine swap. That's not part of my playbook. I think that the transverse nature of this engine makes it a very logical answer. On top of the fact that it is admittedly kind of funny that there's a Honda motor in this car. Yeah? Okay. Next on the list at the back of the car, Steven Turner has asked what I'm going to use for a transmission on this build, as well as for a clutch and a differential. Now, I don't have those last two figured out yet, but I have decided what transmission I want to use. I haven't spoken about it yet because I don't have it in my hands yet. I'm always afraid of talking about stuff before I have it. But if you guys want to know, I've decided on a Quaife 6-speed sequential gearbox for this thing. There's only a few transmissions out there that can really hold the power that I want to make, and this one is definitely the best tool for the job. And I also think it's going to make for a really fun car to drive given some of the technology that this thing is capable of. It can do no lift shifting, auto rev match downshifting, and we can upgrade it to be air shifted with paddles on the steering column in the future, although that's not legal for the class that I want to run. But I'm pretty pumped overall for what this transmission is going to allow us to do, ignoring the fact that that straight cut gearbox whine might not make it the most street friendly car out there. Some sacrifices we just have to make, right? If we're hanging out here down on the bottom of the car, Finnish White Trash has asked, have I thought about putting a firewall between the fuel cell and the engine? And honestly, I'm not really worried about that. The factory fuel tanks were positioned in more or less the exact same place, although what we have now is in a safer position, being between the chassis members and with these new chassis rails added in. And also we're moving from aluminum fuel tanks to a full FIA certified crash-proof fuel cell. We could always go further and further with safety measures, and that's never a bad plan. But I want this fuel tank and all of its components to be serviceable and accessible, and I really don't think I have much to worry about considering the exhaust side of this engine is opposite from the fuel tank. So I think this solution is going to work just fine. If we move to the inside of the car, there's a handful of questions that take place in this thing. And the first of them is Drew on the Cape asking, am I putting a cage in this thing? And tons of you guys left comments asking, did I screw up by putting the carpet in this car before a cage? And I hate to break it to some of you guys, I'm not gonna fully cage this car. I'm only gonna put a 4-point bolt-in roll bar in, which will go over the carpet. And I'm doing that because it's what's required to meet the rule set for Global Time Attack's limited class. One would probably argue that this should be a fully caged car, and I'm not gonna disagree with you. However, I want this car to be streetable, and anyone that has climbed in and out of a fully caged car on any regular basis knows that it absolutely sucks. On top of that, if you look at how close my head is to the ceiling of this car, even with my butt in a bucket seat on the floor of the car, my helmet touches the headliner. There is not enough room to drive this car on the street without a helmet. If it has a cage in it, it would be far, far too dangerous to do. My head will only be about an inch from the A-pillar bars, and that's really not even the best case scenario for a car when you're wearing a helmet. So without one, it's just not an option. In the future, if I decide that this car is just too fast and it needs to be fully caged, we'll go that route. But for now, 4-point roll bar is the answer. Now, SBA, aka Beardy, asked a pretty similar question, and that's, have I thought about doing a tube chassis in this car? Now, this car is a tube chassis from the factory. It's not a unibody, it's not a body over frame. But going full tube chassis on this car would definitely be the best way to build the most competitive car. I've done that kind of work before, I like doing it, but honestly, it's just not what I'm after this time around. I wanted to modify a car, not build one from scratch, right? I don't want to spend the years that it would take to build one. I wanted something I could finish in a reasonable amount of time. And I also didn't want to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars, because to build a tube chassis car correctly means acquiring every single component. And it snowballs, it gets really complicated and really expensive really quick. I wanted to modify a 308, so a tube chassis went right out the window. With that said, I'm not gonna rule it out in the future. If I really want to compete with this car, if I find that it's something I'm really enjoying and wanna push even further, a tube chassis is probably gonna be that next step. That might be version 2.0 of the car. That takes us to our next question by Hunto Ellie, which is why a 308? Because I think we can all admit that there are a lot of cars that would make for a better chassis with what I'm trying to do. The chassis underneath the 308 is from the 1960s, even though it's a 1980s car. I mean, this thing is an antique underneath. It is not known for being stiff. It's known for twisting about as you run it around a track. An MR2, an NSX, I mean, all sorts of other cars would make for a much better mid-engined K-Series platform. But I chose the 308 because I absolutely love the way that it looks. I think the changes that I am making only improve upon those looks. And I don't really care about the rest of it. I'm building this car for me. If it works, it works. If it doesn't, it's a learning experience. I don't really care. This is all in good fun. Cars are supposed to be fun, right? I chose the 308 because I think it's one of the most beautiful cars ever made, bar none. And I said, that is what I want to take out on our racetrack. So that's what we're doing here. Jalek PN asks, since I'm doing all of this work to the control arms, what are we doing with the rest of the suspension parts? How much of it will be custom? Honestly, we gotta get there first. I would love to do custom uprights on this thing, you know, full billet, custom machine. I mean, that'd be really neat, and it would take the suspension to the next level. But I don't know if that's feasible yet. I'd also love to include the idea of doing something maybe like a Corvette or a Lotus upright, but I just have to get to that point. I know that we're gonna be doing custom control arms, and I know that we need to revise these uprights a bit, so I don't think we're gonna stay with the stock Ferrari stuff. It's the wrong bolt pattern for what we wanna do. It limits our brake options, and they're, as said before, pretty antiquated. Ideally, something fully custom will happen, but that's a bridge we'll cross when we get to it. Another question was asked, with all of the changes to the suspension, how will we know when the suspension geometry is correct? And that's a multifaceted answer. One, we're gonna draw a lot of this stuff up in CAD. We need to draw the control arms in order to machine new ones, and we might as well draw all of the suspension so that we can articulate it and make note of the changes that we're making and make sure that we have the camber curves that we want, the caster curves, that we have the instant centers where we want them, the roll centers where we want it, etc., etc. On top of that, this is a learning experience. We can come back after we put this car on track and make changes. That's how you build a car. It doesn't all happen here in the shop before the car leaves. We're gonna take this car out and we're gonna find all sorts of stuff that's wrong with it or that needs improvement, and we're gonna make those changes. If we gotta go in there and start cutting up suspension tabs and moving stuff around, so be it. That's part of the process. Back to the engine. A bunch of you guys asked, what's the plan for the exhaust? Because the exhaust is part of what makes the car. It gives it its personality. A lot of you guys are worried about how this thing is gonna sound. I'm not. I'm pretty sure it's gonna sound amazing. A turbocharged 4-cylinder built aggressively as this one will be is gonna sound good. But on top of that, I wanna do some cool stuff with the exhaust, maybe some oval. I wanna build it out of titanium to save some weight. But what I am not going to do is some hood exit blast pipe. That is not my style. I'm thinking some center exit dual pipes right here at the back of the car. Ryan Chapman asked about the pedal assembly in this thing and asked if we're gonna change it. And it's hard to show you guys, it's dark in here, but the pedal box in this thing is pretty goofy. The pedals aren't what I would call ergonomic, and they're also extremely offset. If you look up here, the steering wheel is way off to the side of the pedals. You sit practically sideways in this car in order to drive it. So I think what we will do is some sort of Tilton or Willwood pedal box under here, but we gotta make sure we have room for the steering column that goes right through it. It'll be an interesting challenge, but we'll figure it out. The legend himself, John Sibal, has asked, do I have a plan for a livery on this car? Am I gonna do something cool and old school flavored? Honestly, John, I don't know. I haven't gotten that far yet. I'm battling with myself. Part of me says bring Andrew Ritter in once again and have him design something quintessentially Andrew. He's been an integral part of all of my livery designs in the past, and he's one of the most talented people that I know. But I'm also thinking about leaving my comfort zone and doing something different. I've got an idea with a buddy of mine that might draw up something that is a bit unexpected. Although honestly, I'm pretty much leaning towards just keeping this car yellow. It looks great as it is. I've never owned a yellow car. I never thought I would own a yellow car. But I think this thing might look pretty sweet in one color going around the track. Several of you guys have asked what the Aero plans for the car are, or asked if it will have a wing. Some of you guys have said, please do not put that Aero package on the car that we saw in the last episode in the rendering that Andrew did. Sorry guys, it's going on there. It's definitely happening. I'm turning to RS Future and my buddy Amir Benetu to develop a full Aero package for this car that will include a big wing, a front splitter, a diffuser, and a flat underbottom. We're going all out with this thing to fit within the limited class rule set, but we're aiming to drastically improve the way this car drives. And to ice the cake, I think it's gonna look pretty sick. T Sandwiches asks, what is the overall build timeline for the car? There are two goals at hand. The first one is that the car will be at SEMA, November 2021. It will be in the central hall at the H&R Springs booth. H&R has always been there to support my builds and give me a platform to show it off to the world, and this year's no different. Immediately following SEMA, I'm hoping to have this car out at Global Time Attack's Super Lap Battle. I want to compete in this thing. It's part of why I'm building it. I can't guarantee that we'll get out there and have no issues. I mean, developing a race car is a big challenge. However, I want to get out there and give it my best shot. I'm not planning on winning. I don't expect that whatsoever. If we get out there and have one fast flying lap, I'm going to be happy. Ed asked from his account, apparently, what has surprised me most about the way Ferrari built this car? And honestly, it comes down to the chassis. It's not elegant. As mentioned, the chassis in this car is from the 1960s. From what I understand, it's pretty much identical to a Dino chassis. It's just stuck in a 1980s or 1970s body. It's pretty archaic, it's antiquated. There's a lot of room for improvement on it. None of it's really square, straight, or true, and this car's never been wrecked. It's just a result of the build quality of these things. It's a very cool car. It is a neat car. It's not what I would call a well-built car, but there's nothing wrong with that. It's not supposed to be. It's all about ostentatiousness. It's a Ferrari. I think a lot of Ferrari guys get lost in this idea that this is supposed to be the best car of its kind or ever built or whatever. It's not. The 163 wheel horsepower and the 850 pound engine blew that idea out the window a long time ago. Sean Loeb, I have no idea how you pronounce your name, but you have asked, will I transition this car away from its time attack build as this goes on? We're gonna find out as we get there. Honestly, right now, the goal is a streetable time attack car. If I get this thing on track and it turns out that it is competitive and I wanna develop the chassis more, I'm just gonna push it further. It will go further and further towards being a race car, and I'll probably throw this concept of it being streetable out the window. But if I get it out there and it behaves like I expect it to, which is a wiggly piece of spaghetti, and it turns out it's not competitive, and this was just a huge expensive experiment, that's fine with me. I have no problems with that. It's what I expect. That's part of the fun here. In which case, we'll convert it more towards a street car and have a bunch of fun with it. It's still going to be fucking sick. All right, and I've saved Aaron Island's question for last, although tons of you guys have asked, do I get joy, or how much joy do I get out of ruining a Ferrari? And the answer is none. One, I don't think I'm ruining this car at all. I think I'm improving it in every way. This car, while really cool in factory form, isn't that amazing of a car. It's not very rare, it's not very special. That's gonna upset some Ferrari people, but too bad. Do I get joy out of upsetting people? No, that's not what I'm here to do. None of the decisions that have gone into this car have anything to do with upsetting people, and I don't find joy in the fact that those people are upset by what I'm doing. With all of that said, there's definitely humor to be had in the fact that some people do get so upset about the decisions I'm making. Some people just don't get it, they can't wrap their head around it, and that's fine, but it's their loss. At the end of the day, I think this car is gonna turn out absolutely fantastic, and I think it's gonna be the best version of a 308 that there could be. My 2 cents. All right, guys, that's all the questions for today. I appreciate all of you guys participating and asking. I hope you have enjoyed this process. I hope this wasn't a snooze fest, but if it was, we'll be back on Tuesday with actual fabrication. I appreciate you guys. As always, I'll catch you then.
We do have a fresh question that just came in. It's from Jeremy Whittle.
Okay.
Has anyone really been far and even as decided to use Go?
Shut the fuck up.